Hello everyone, this is your instructor Tariq Darwish with you again. If you're watching this video, you've probably have gone already through the free introduction in the previous video. I hope you enjoyed it. And from now on, I'm going to take you on a journey through the PMBOK. Now, a little word about the PMBOK and about this journey, and to set your expectations. Watching these videos and the presentation does not mean that you should not or will not need to read the PMBOK. You still need to read the PMBOK at least once and carefully read it. I will be talking to you about studying strategy and to prepare for the exam. And but I just wanted to mention this early on our journey, that these videos, these presentations are going to be very valuable to you in terms of preparing you for taking and passing the PMP exam from the first attempt. But their main aim are to decipher what is otherwise a very difficult to read PMBOK. And it will make reading the PMBOK much easier. So what we are going to cover here correlates very closely to what's in the PMBOK, but it's not like we are going to be citing the PMBOK here. All right. So we are going to be deciphering it. We are going to be explaining the concepts in the PMBOK. We are going to give you case studies and examples that you wouldn't otherwise find in the PMBOK. But the standard as is inside the PMBOK, and you should, before you take the exam, you should read the PMBOK carefully at least once. What I can promise you right now is that reading the PMBOK now is going to be a much easier task. So that said, let's get to it. And here is what you are going to learn in this module. At the end of this module, you will get the following outcomes. We are going to define what a project is and what project management is in a formal way, and differentiate it to other business practices like operations and so on. We are going to put the project management into context in terms of business strategy and in terms of the bigger picture, bigger business picture, and so on. And we will talk about project management business documents. These are the documents that are typically prepared on a business level before we start off a project. We are going to introduce to you the project environment concepts, things like things like enterprise environmental factors, organizational process assets, and so on and so forth. And we will be talking we will be taking a close look at the role of the project manager and what makes a good project manager, the skill set, and if you may, the DNA of a project manager. Right. And I've actually divided this module into several parts in order to make the videos shorter, so that you can pace yourself better. And instead of having one very long video, I've tried to make them shorter videos. And so I've divided this introductory module into several videos. The first of which is going to deal with this introduction here. What is the purpose of the PMBOK and what is a project? We are going to formally define project, what is a project, in contrast to other business practices and so on. The rest, what is project management, and the rest will be dealt with in subsequent parts of this module in subsequent videos. So here's the rest of the table of contents. We will be talking about them in the subsequent videos. So this table of contents is relevant to this entire module, the project management framework, but in each video we'll be covering a part of this table of content. So the module is divided into sub-modules or chunks of shorter videos. Right, so what is the purpose of the PMBOK? Well, PMI maintains over and over again in the PMBOK that the PMBOK is descriptive rather than prescriptive. So the PMBOK reflects what you guys do out there in projects. How you go about your projects is reflected in the PMBOK. And you means project practitioners, project management professionals. So you can think of the PMBOK as a great collection of good practices, which is put together by some of the greatest minds in that field, the project management field. And you will, as you probably remember from the previous video, there's a whole appendix on the PMBOK that lists all the contributors and reviewers of the standard and of the entire PMBOK. A list that contains hundreds of names. Each name, you will see that each name has several titles attached to it. There's a lot of brain juice there, and PMI was careful in selecting those drafters and reviewers and making sure they come from every walk of industry. So you will find them reflecting various industries from different geographical areas, so that we have ourselves really a great collection of best practices worldwide and throughout various industries, which makes the standard so relevant. And as PMI maintains, the standard gives you the best way to manage most projects in most environments most of the time. So that disclaimer makes room for customizations and exceptions. But before you think of exceptions and customizations, it's really, really worthwhile to adapt and adopt the standards, because you will find in most cases it's at least 90% relevant to how you manage your projects. And great organizations, multinational companies around the world, very successful organizations, when you look at their project management processes, you can easily map them to the PMBOK, and they are inspired by the PMBOK. Nevertheless, every organization does its own customization to suit their particular circumstances and particular industry and particular geographical regions and so on and so forth. Right. So here is the formal definition of a project as per PMI. The formal definition, the most widely accepted definition of a project. A project is a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product or service. And notice we have underlined the words temporary and unique. Projects, unlike operations, they don't go on forever. They have a definite start date and a definite end date. At least a defined start date and defined end date. Whether that end date slips, it's a different story, but at least there is a defined start date and a defined end date, and the project has to produce something that was not previously there, like a production line, like a road, a commercial building, a residential villa, you name it, a space shuttle, a new system in an organization, a system upgrade in an organization, a new software. So these are all unique products or services. A new tariff plan in telecom companies. Launching a new tariff plan is a project. There is a new product there, or you can call it a service. So you have to create something that was not previously there in order for for that endeavor to be called a project. And notice the word endeavor itself. The word endeavor has that dimension of, you know, going on a kind of an adventure, because unlike operations, projects are unique. But operations, like, for example, let me just give you an example. Producing 100 bottles of bottled water per second from a production line. This is not a project. This is operations, because it goes on and on and on forever, more or less. But putting in place a new production line for increasing the water bottling capacity of a certain organization, that's a project. Its unique product is that new production line, and the project is temporary because putting in place a new production line has a defined start date and a defined end date. So that's the official official definition of a project, and we differentiate them from normal operations work, as I mentioned in the example. So projects are temporary, and they cease when objectives have been attained. So that's when you have produced your unique product or service, or God forbid, they finish when we decide we cannot attain their objectives anymore, or it's not economically feasible to attain their objectives, and we do something called early termination. Sometimes in some projects, few projects here and there, you might kind of preempt them and terminate them early. So we will be talking about that a little bit when we come to the procurement chapter as part of contracting and what we do in early termination and so on. So I'll be talking about that a little bit there. But that's how projects end. Typically, a project ends when you attain its objectives. In a few cases, you might have early termination for some business reasons. Right. Yeah, so uniqueness, we already talked about it. And projects have this other feature to them, if you may, other attribute, that's progressive elaboration. You typically, in a project, you don't have all the details at the beginning, and as you go more and more into the project, you learn more and more about it, and the level of risk becomes lower. So typically the highest level of risk is at the beginning of the project, and as you go deeper and deeper into the project and learn more details about it, you typically decrease your risk level. So that's the progressive elaboration dimension of projects. Unlike operations, typically in an operation there is maybe some learning curve, after which there's a kind of a saturation of the productivity, because you more or less know all the details about your operation and business, and that operation become a kind of a routine, and there's no more progressive elaboration. In projects, you learn more details more and more from the beginning even until the end of the project, and you might even at the day of delivery still learn some details. Those of you who have been there would probably recognize the term snag list in some projects. Even at the day of delivery, when you are trying to hand over your the stakeholder that you're handing over to, whether it's operation or a customer or a client, they might come up with some, oh yeah, that's what we wanted, great job, but, and they can start giving you their remarks and probably give you an official snag list to fix before they sign off on the project. So even until the end of the project, you can still learn some more details, and that's the progressive elaboration attribute of projects. Now, as we mentioned, projects are not the same as operations. Nevertheless, there are some similarities between projects and operations, and whether you're working on a project or on day-to-day operations, still work is performed by people, and we all have constraints resources, cost constraints, time constraints, and so on. Whether it's projects or operations, we both have to plan, execute, and control. And that makes for a possibility for operations to make use of project management tools. And actually, this is a worldwide trend in companies, that they try to describe their operations as if they are projects, so that they can utilize the intuitive, if you ask me, intuitive, easy to use project management tools, as I hope you would come to appreciate when you delve deeper and deeper into these videos and into the field of project management. Microsoft Project, you probably know it as a project management, project planning and management and project controlling tool, but it is used also for operations. Several companies around the world use Microsoft Project in order to plan their shifts, for example, because they still have resources that you can feed into the tool, much like project managers feed resources into their Microsoft Project. They still have interrelated tasks that they can utilize Microsoft Project in order to link those tasks and so on. So that's just one example of operations making use of project management tools that are easy to use and intuitive. So yeah, because of those similarities between projects and operations, operations can utilize project management tools, and project managers can also utilize some operations concepts that will make their work seamless. So they are not, the two worlds are not completely separate. Nevertheless, of course, we have already gone through those differences between projects and operations. Operations are ongoing and repetitive, while projects are unique and they are temporary and unique and produce a unique product or result. Now, one term that really hurts my ear when I hear it in some companies sometimes, when they talk about an ongoing project. That's not the best way. If you ask any project management standard, that's not a good practice. Let's say if you present your work as an ongoing project. When we consult to companies, when we see stuff like that, we highlight it as a potential improvement opportunity. Notice I didn't say problem, I said improvement opportunity. Try always to focus on the positive. So instead of saying a problem which might trigger some negative energy, you identify the problem as an improvement opportunity which triggers some positive energy to meet a certain challenge and take us from point A to a better point B, where that improvement opportunity has been addressed. Right. So projects are temporary endeavors that produce a unique product or service, whereas operations are ongoing and repetitive, as we already covered. Now, this might be a good point in time for you to reflect on the projects that you have been working on since you're preparing to take the PMP exam. And at one point in time, you will be attempting to fill in the application form for the PMP exam. And part of that application form, you will have to write about your experience, because as we said in the previous video, you need to have at least 3 years of experience. If you are a university graduate, at least 3 years of project work experience. Corresponding to that, you need 4,500 hours of project work experience. And those project experience shouldn't be too old. So that experience should not, you cannot declare projects that you worked on beyond 8 years ago. So this might be a good point to reflect on the projects that you have worked on in the past 8 years or so, okay, and write down their names or some of their names, and some description about your role on each of them. You will need that. You will need that to fill in the application for the PMP exam. And of course, you will need it to bolster the idea of what is a project versus operation. Also, a practical tip: if your work was what you might think of as operations work, you still can present it as doing work for a project. Like, for example, if your work is routinely auditing invoices submitted by contractors, you can still present that. You might think of it as routine operations work, but it serves several projects. So you might be able to utilize that also towards declaring the 4,500 hours of project work for the PMP exam application. Okay, so why do we do projects? So this is trying to put projects a little bit into strategic context. A project is triggered by one or more of the non-comprehensive list that you see on the screen now. If there's a market demand, if you are doing a project because there is a market demand, you're probably working in a marketing company or a manufacturing company. So when there is an increase in demand on the products you're producing, or there is a forecast of an increase in demand that is coming in the future for the product you're doing, you might be considering a new production line. Like, for example, you're preparing for a new shampoo formula in your organization, so you might be that might trigger a project for a new production line for that shampoo. An organizational need, projects that are triggered by an organizational need. Let me give you an example. You might trigger a corporate-wide project in order to prepare your organization for the ISO certification, for example, or the OSHA certification, company-wide or certain departments, if the scope of the ISO or the OSHA is targeting certain departments rather than the entire organization. So that's a project that is triggered by an organizational need. Or in the 2005 or so, if my memory serves me well, there was that Sarbanes-Oxley the Sarbanes-Oxley bill that was passed in the US, forcing companies listed in the New York Stock Exchange into certain practices when it comes to data security and accounting practices. It was triggered by the I don't know if you've heard of it. There was a big scandal surrounding the Enron energy company. It was one of the biggest companies in the world, and the company has disappeared now because of that scandal. And in order to prevent the reasons for that scandal and the reasons for the collapse of that company, a new bill was passed in the US. It's called Sarbanes-Oxley Law, and it triggered a wave of projects in organizations that are listed in the New York Stock Exchange in order to be compliant with that standard, the Sarbanes-Oxley standard. So that was a project triggered by an organizational need. If you are doing projects based on customer requests, you are probably working in some kind of a contracting company. So you do projects for customers. You don't do projects for yourself typically, but for customers. So that's typically the environment of contracting companies. Construction contracting, telecom contracting, whatever, software development, you name it. You might be doing a project because of a technological advance that you want to take advantage of. It might trigger projects in your organization. And finally, some kind of legal requirements, such as new emission requirements that might be more strict than the current ones, for example, in some countries. So they become a legal requirement. Organizations are typically given some kind of grace period in order to be compliant with the new legal requirements and so on. So a project might be triggered because of that. Now, this concludes the first part of the second presentation, which is project management framework. Yeah, please tune in for the next parts for this project management framework. Thank you.